if you didn't learn it within a week of getting onboarded, you got fired.
The goal is to have a real reason to modernize. There was this poster in a place I used to work that said, design is not how things look, it's how things work.
The San Francisco train system runs on 5-inch floppy disks. And they have to pay somebody to like flip the disk over to keep things running. All right, we're going to talk about the important thing today that everybody wants to know about, integrating AI into existing systems. So it's like really easy when you're starting, when you're starting with like a clean slate or starting from scratch, like, okay, yeah, let's put some AI in some stuff. But what about, legacy systems where we have old code bases, old technical debt? Like, how do you approach that?
So if you look at, I can think of this example that someone gave me was you would have these old systems that are really hard to use for humans to be able to use because that was how it was built. It was the systems that were put in place, and a lot of the human interaction with the system was just workarounds, right? I mean, this is a financial software, and the way you used it was painful. Like it was just painful to use, but and you had to learn it. Otherwise, like as hard as the software was to use, if you didn't learn it within a week of getting onboarded, you got fired. The nature of things, that was the incentive that was in place. Like you just had to deal with this extremely bad UX because there was no other way. Where I think we have an opportunity with agents and with AI is that these systems, these agents basically are a lot more not forgiving, but they're a lot more adaptable to these tougher UX problems because they can go into the system, they can learn, they can kind of interact with it, where you have to think from like a human perspective, okay, what is so hard about this? How do you get a human to use the system? I think my hypothesis is that an agent can do this more easily because it's almost like a computer to computer interaction. Like you can train it, but at the end of the day, it's still a computer kind of understanding what the process is and trying to deal with it. But again, that's at least my take. I would say integrating the integration part, I'll leave it up to you guys. Like on how you talk about it from a human perspective, that human computer interaction, I would say, would get a lot easier with agents in the mix.
So you're saying like a kind of like a low-hanging fruit would be to identify something that's painful from like an HCI, human computer interaction standpoint, and that would be ripe for integration with an agent?
You could start there. I mean, like that's if that is the right use case, I mean, we still have to figure out, because I mean, what if it's just like a one-off task that has to be done, once every 2 months or something? That doesn't make sense to integrate an agent for. But I would look at an automatable process that is also hard to use.
Gotcha. Although I do think that if it is a once in a couple of months thing, it's probably extremely painful and expensive for the business. So you might actually want to integrate that, and then you have like a nice wide timeline for that. Austin, what do you think? Like, when do you think integrating AI into a legacy or enterprise system is the right move?
I liked the stuff about like the old financial stuff, but then it's like where we need to understand how the humans are using these systems in order to understand the process, and then we need to get an agent to do that process, kind of thing, and that's the human part of the integration.
I want to clarify something. I mean, with AI and with agents, we're still kind of so the way software works. I mean, the software is kind of a intermediary. It's like between you and getting something done, right? If we didn't, if you could just get tasks done without having to go through software, we would get it done, right? Software is a necessity. It makes our lives easier. But a lot of that is built on kind of us providing instructions to computers to kind of get those things done. But even with agents, with AI, the traditional kind of design process hasn't changed. You're still observing the world. You're looking at how humans are doing things. You're understanding it, and then you're designing solutions based on that observation. So that process hasn't changed. So the tools that designers use. So we're looking at kind of understanding the process, mapping out the journeys, talking to users, observing how they behave, like ride-alongs, like all of these things are still a critical part of how we understand the world, how we understand the process, how do we understand the system, and how do we design for it, right? It's still all kind of the same. So when you're talking about integrating AI into existing systems, the process by which you do it is still kind of the same. And I think UX and design plays a hugely critical role in that, because your understanding of that system is what helps you kind of build better agents that can actually map to the human processes. Like that's what we're building towards.
Yeah, that's great. It's music to my ears, because like I think there was a time in design when everybody was thinking about the artifacts that designers were throwing around. Like, so my work is Figma or something, right? And like what I'm hearing you say, Shahed, is really fascinating, because now we go back to the fundamentals. When I was taking HCI classes in my graduate work, right, where it's like the focus of the actual interaction between the human and the computer is becoming much more prevalent again, right?
And I think myself and the whole industry in general, I think, kind of fell into this tooling trap where we're like, Figma is design, right? Like that became Figma becoming synonymous with kind of like the whole design industry. But I think what we're seeing now is, I know we're going to talk more about, how agents get integrated into legacy systems, but I think it's also important to talk about, if we from a design perspective, we have to get back to those fundamentals. It's no longer about, how fast can you prototype in Figma, or how well can you design, create UI artifacts, right? It's not. That is still important, but it's not as important as understanding the human process that you can take back to mapping agents.
So you can find those areas in the enterprise in these legacy systems that are basically super inefficient, and you might actually get another benefit from that, which is understanding where the inefficiency came from, and then also being able to automate. I think that's really cool.
What I like about what he's saying, and there was this poster in a place I used to work that said, design is not how things look, it's how things work. And like designers truly returning to the how things work of like the process. We talk in episode 1 of this season about like we're automating human process, and that's not like how things work. So like really like leveraging traditional design tools is the right way. AI's core power is the integration with existing systems. And existing systems can range from, SaaS tools you have like a HubSpot or a Twilio, or, all the way into like your own ERP, and order management system. And you have to build tools for LLMs to interact with. And so like traditional software pattern, right? I'm going to build a mobile app. I have a bunch of existing systems. So I'm going to build some sort of like API gateway that, creates mobile specific calls. It's written in GraphQL, or, it's written with a GraphQL interface or REST. And then I integrate. The same patterns kind of emerging again, which is these abstractions of existing systems through for LLMs to talk to them. And we can do that with custom tools. So we write Python code that allows LLMs to, interact with endpoints or interfaces of existing systems, or, people are using a lot of MCP servers to do that kind of stuff too. And that's where I would do it. And so you asked when, I guess, and I didn't answer the when question. And it's, the same, it's at the same time a human would interact with that system. I keep talking about claims because we're working on a claims management system for like a regional insurance carrier. So it's like top of mind. When a claims agent human, logs into a system and does something, the AI needs to be able to log into the same system and do that.
Right.
And it could interface through an API, so technically, or it could interface through a UI more like a human does.
So one thing that people struggle with in regards to integrating AI in legacy systems is data. So like the classic trope with data is like and LLMs, garbage in, garbage out, right? And so we have like these massive amounts of legacy data that could be critical to these integrations. What do y'all think about that? How does an organization kind of navigate that?
I mean, definitely garbage in, garbage out. LLMs do a really good job. Okay, so everybody starts their very first agent build or when they start programming with an LLM. First thing you do is a RAG.
Yep. It's like the easiest one too,
yeah,
right?
So I'm gonna take a whole bunch of PDFs or PowerPoints or Google Docs or Word docs or whatever. I'm gonna put them in a vector store, and now I can chat with my documents.
Yep.
And it's absolutely incredible.
Yep.
Like you're like, holy shit, I'm talking to my docs, and it's mind blowing. And then you realize the LMs are making stuff up. They're not citing their sources. They're doing random things. It's not finding stuff. And so you have to like start evolving, like how you put things into, how you give data to an LLM.
The data piece is really critical and important. And I mean, it's going to be the engine that feeds a lot of these high value integrations that you're going to have. But I'm curious, like, there's a couple of things I want to get into, which is, we're consultants, right? So our team's going to have to start managing expectations for these integrations in a more consultative fashion. So what I mean by that is you just went on and said there's a lot of really fascinating use cases with this data. And what I heard was a lot of interesting places where more advanced features, more advanced integration with the LLM can happen. And it sounds pretty cool and easy, but like we still have to manage the expectation of what this thing's going to do. So like Shahed, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, like managing that kind of relationship, if you will,
So just to clarify, are you talking about the expectation of what this integration could look like? What are
Everybody's
the
so
outputs?
jazzed about AI and they're like, it's just going to fix our problem. So let's just turn it on, right? We have to manage that somehow.
Right. And this goes back to like what we talked about previously about that scale of initially buying something and then going all the way to build, right? So like starting from buy, it's like it has to be obvious about yes, we can sell people on the dream of AI is going to solve all of your problems, but there is a reality. I mean, and I think that's the part that builds trust. It could just be as simple as, yeah, you don't really need an agent. You just need a workflow with like one LM call, for instance, right? Like just something like super simple. So us being able to make that distinction between your existing workflow is actually pretty simple. You don't need a full agentic build. You can get away with something simple is the call that we need to make as consultants.
Do you think there's like a classic case where maybe they're over their skis, or it's like where an integration might just be not appropriate?
I mean, the connection of existing systems is like almost all of the complexity of any software project.
Yeah.
Right. So like, and there is no, in any reasonably scaled business, you have, vendored software, you have custom built software, you have a whole bunch of Excel documents, all this kind of stuff. And any new tools that you add to your stack have to fit and connect with all of those other systems or some of them. Right. And so I actually like, when we microserviced up our teams and we started creating like domain-driven design and domain-based teams, the goal would be like a team would own its API. So if I own, orders and another team owns authentication, the auth team owns the auth APIs and they're, whatever, RESTful APIs that everybody integrates with. The future I see is, we're going to have each team developing and distributing some form of integration point for agents inside of an enterprise as well. So instead of having and delivering my, my Swagger documents so that someone can, use auth or my order service, I'm going to distribute, some sort of MCP server, or I have an SDK that is a series of LangGraph nodes that can be pulled into a larger agent ecosystem that know how to call tools, interact with my API, have the right, kind of like permissions, escalations, read write capabilities, all that kind of stuff. But my team, as part of like order management or authentication or whatever it is, owns the API for agents to interact with it the same way I'd own the API for another service to interact with me.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can almost see like a reality where, that squad-based design that some teams go through where like you own an entire stack of like functionality.
Yeah.
Now that's further augmented by, your other dependent services or other people's agentic systems.
And this is coming up a lot in like our kind of sales and pre-engagement calls. And it's a lot of enterprises are trying to figure out like, how do I prevent sprawl in terms of AI implementations inside of my organization, and how do I have teams create interfaces in which other people can build agents on top of their services? And the answer is like kind of come down to two things. It's either I build and distribute a custom tool, so tool being like a SDK, some Python code that other people can install, so that it gets like pushed up into an Artifactory, or I build and run an MCP server that sits in front of my service. Right. And like those two things work really, really well. And I actually think MCP often overcomplicates the solution, and custom tools are a much easier place to start.
I mean, I agree with some of the folks at LangChain where, MCP is a really great integration point with an agent that you don't own or control.
Sure.
And so that makes a lot of sense. But the power of the abstractions, especially when we're talking about, our favorite, like LangGraph, it makes it a lot simpler to just build it, right?
The thing that gets complicated and really interesting when you're building these agent interaction points is like when I build a REST service, REST defines like I have my resource, I can CRUD on the resource, and then there's a handful of properties that I can, create, read, update, and delete. With agents, you have to think of how it's more user-based. Like rather than it being this like programmatic, create user, delete user, update user, you think of like what someone would want to be doing or asking and what the agent would be asking of the system. And the tool actually could make a single tool endpoint could make multiple RESTful calls, right? And that's what the agent would want to do. So I want to like create an account and, place an order in one kind of tool call. And so the agent needs to be able to, have an MCP or a tool, a tool SDK that actually does that. Right. And then all the like RESTful endpoints, those are just like standard Python code. Yeah. And it's actually, it's just traditional software, boys and girls.
Yeah, and I think it goes back, and I want to pull Shahed back into this because I think it goes back to what we were saying. So my follow-up question was going to be, like, who owns this initiative in the business, right? Because now we're talking about, a cohesion of a lot of teams doing a lot of different things, but I think engineering needs partners to illuminate kind of the new methodology of these things working. So who owns it, Shahed? Is it just designers writing code?
No, I think it's it's an age-old problem. I think it's still a design problem, because if you look at, like we think about end-to-end design, right? That has been the big mantra, like saying, the experience has to be end-to-end. Because if you think about a customer or a user interacting with the system, they go through the entire process. They come to your website, they buy a product, they check out, they get an email, then they can follow up with the order. They have whatever the system is. But if you look at it behind the scenes, like you have squads or you have different teams kind of owning other different parts of the experience. And what you were talking about, like the connection points, like that's all. But that is the main complication with legacy software or with just software in general. Like, what are those connection points, right? The user doesn't care about that. For them, they want a seamless experience. They want to go from end to end. Like a true end to end is system agnostic, right? It just has to work. And what excites me the most is the fact that where gaps exist in traditional software, this is where agents can kind of close that gap. They can pick it up and they can see, okay, you're handing off a customer from a checkout to I don't know, like some kind of internal process or like some kind of customer service problem, like then agent is able to bridge that gap, which is what excites me about, this whole um, agents kind of taking over the human process of something that the user doesn't really have to do, right? Um, as to who owns it, um, that is more of a human and politics kind of problem. Like it's like I don't think that's more of a deeper service problem. Like you won't have um like design would love to own that, but we're generally not empowered enough to own it.
I think it's like similar to if we're all of our teams are developing services and we're like deploying them into a service mesh, then similarly we're going to create some sort of like agent API mesh where each team, if I own a domain, I own an agent interaction point for that domain. My primary consumer of my API previously was other services inside of the system, and that might not be true anymore. It might be an agent, right? Or an AI system, and so that AI system needs to know how to talk to it. And you reframe the conversation, so your product and design teams need to be thinking about how, they were thinking about what was the developer experience. Now they're going to be thinking about what is the agent experience when they're integrating with these things. So what does an agent need to do versus, a developer might want something different than how an agent would call into the system because of how the agent kind of navigates around your enterprise software.
AI isn't a magic wand, especially on old systems. At Focused, we help teams integrate smart tools without blowing everything up. Ready to modernize with precision? Go to focused.io.
All right, so we were talking about, how the classic integration point for software. I love what you brought up. CRUD APIs is what I think about all the time, right? You're modeling like business logic with deterministic code. So agents are these wild systems that can act like humans. Let's dig even further into some of these integration points. So what are we hearing from our customers like about their own particular struggles with these systems and integrating with agents?
So I think the big questions we hear are, how do we create distributable tools inside of my enterprise so we don't have 20 different implementations of integration with the order management service? And that having 20 is a problem for so many reasons, like, security, observability, management of access, like all these other things. So we want like kind of like one API gateway or agent gateway, if you will. Who owns and manages those agent interactions with an existing system or with the system? So that would be like who's going to build it. So who builds that one common tool that interacts with X system? And then finally, like who operates, deploys it, and then who manages the developer experience around it. So like what's the product that's actually there when it comes to that tool?
There's a ton that we can talk about with like great detail about these integration points. And, Austin in his true self always has lots of opinions and can go really deep. And I do want to scratch into there. But I mean, from I'm more concerned or actually interested in like the nitty gritty of what customers are saying to you from a design perspective. Like, what are you hearing from customers? What keeps them up at night?
I think a lot of the stuff that you're hearing from customers is more curiosity around agents. I mean, there's a lot of buzz around agents. People are implementing it. It's like, and I'm also experimenting with kind of the messaging about how we talk about agents and what it actually is. I think the first step is to actually get super basic about agents. Like what even is an agent, right? Like what is the difference between me just asking ChatGPT for something versus what an agent can do, right? Just educating the customer about that. I think it's like a great first step. But like I was talking to one customer about kind of what they're struggling with and what they're looking at with their existing process. And there was a really interesting word that they called up. It was like this existing process that we have. It was some customer service process, and they said this is a grind, right? The word grind. Like it takes their customer service agents to about 20 minutes to resolve one ticket. And then we walked kind of through that process, and it's their agents kind of pulling up different systems, looking up different information. They pull up one document on this portal. They open up another document in another portal, make sure the numbers match. Right? There's a lot of this manual kind of tedious work, and they feel, and rightly so, that a lot of this could be automated away. Right? And that is what we're looking at. These kind of manual, tedious tasks that kind of right now can only be done by a human because we don't have the technology, or we don't have like basically we don't have the technology in place to be able to handle that. And what is amazing about LLMs is the fact that they're able to converse in natural language, right? And they can kind of, it's different from deterministic software because they can handle a wide variety of use cases. So, so that's what I'm hearing from customers, is that how can we start to think about automating these processes away? But along with that, there's a lot of hesitation and concern. It's like, how do we know that once we automate it, that the agent can actually do it right? Like, is it accurate? Is it precise? What happens if there's a mistake? Right? There's a lot of curiosity, but that's also balanced by a lot of fear, I would say, about the accuracy and how it basically boils down to this: is this even possible?
I think from my practice perspective, and when we think about the things that DevOps or SREs or platform engineers have like historically done, are usually kind of seen as the scary bits. Like scaling up and down clusters has been automated, relatively speaking, for quite a while, right? And it's actually within a certain predictable amount that you can do that with just basic like statistical analysis. I was chatting with somebody recently and I was telling them about, I was really interested in like using observability data and feeding it to an agent and what could come out of it, right? And their response to me was, "That's dumb." And I'm like, interesting. They're like, "Why would you put that in an LLM?" I'm like, "Why wouldn't you?" Like, I'm not sure where the friction is there, right? I think the point they were trying to make though is like, you have all this data that's structured in a way so you don't get any benefit from the LLM parsing through and understanding that data. I actually think that you get better performance that way, right? So it's interesting to see that there's holdouts in a lot of different places. And I will say that I think from an operational standpoint, like a lot of your traditional platforming engineer types are holding out and concerned about it. Even though in the market, there's a considerable amount of places that are trying to automate those away. And that's the whole point of DevOps, is to automate things away. So it's ironic that there's a bit of resistance there.
I think the integration conversation is really interesting, and this customer you're talking about is really interesting. Traditionally, we build software for two users. We build them for other systems, so that's developing an API, or we build them for a user, which is developing an interface. And I think we are introducing a third user, which is an agent. And by introducing a third user, we have to think about how an agent needs information fed to it in a way that the agent can perform the same way, perform at its best. So when we do usability studies with users, we're looking at like, okay, what is information architecture? How does a human process this information? We use colors and visual cues and animation to show things. When we have an API, it's all about structure and data hierarchy and all those other things. The agent is almost a marriage of those two, and we will start to define and design and build interfaces for agents. The cool thing though is that agents, because they can interact like a human, but they are a computer, can call these APIs. So if there was something built for a systems user, it can call APIs by using custom built tools. Or if there's something like in this customer service use case where they're pulling up documents and comparing numbers, it can actually browse the internet and pull up, log in. And so the LLM or the agent can act as a person or a computer in the right place. Now, it's not optimal when it's doing those things. And so systems will start to have agent users. And those agent users, or it will be the responsibility of the service provider to design and build a system that can be consumed by an agent. And they will have to maintain that, and they will have to observe that, and they will get bugs based on that, and they'll have to fix those bugs, all that kind of stuff. But there's a third user coming, or it's here, and we will build for it. And actually, we're seeing it. So if you go to like Vercel or LangChain's docs or a handful of places, and you just like do .md at the end of their docs, all of their documentation gets produced as Markdown rather than Python notebooks or whatever they are. And the reason they're doing that is so that an LLM can browse those docs more effectively than if they have kind of like 2 columns, then that's hard, or a table that's hard for an LLM to parse or something like that. They have LLM oriented documentation. So they've decided there's a user that is an LLM, and they're catering to it now, which is awesome.
So that's agent experience right
Yep,
there.
that's the agent experience.
But I think that's a super important point to hammer down on, because the integration point is like so wide now. Like, we don't just have contracts. You have to change your thinking. So everything that your organization produces is potentially, what I'm hearing, an integration point with an agent.
Well, in like the user interface, yes, but also if you want to optimize for like an agent to be able to interact.
That's what I mean, though. That's what
then,
you're saying.
Then we actually like
But
we create a new contract, which is like I've now 3 users. So I API for my, like if I'm GitHub, I have an API for developers to do deterministic stuff. I have a UI so people can like click, merge, see diffs, all that kind of stuff. And then I need something that produces and architects information in a way that an agent can do it. And it's not the API and it's not the UI. It's something in between those two, or completely separate.
It's something your organization probably hasn't thought about, and it could be something as simple as generating Markdown files and making it available, but it is a foundational change in the way that you think about integration.
Well, and product managers are going to need to, and devs and designers, but are going to need to start thinking about how does an agent reason about navigating the system the same way we think about how does a user navigate a system. So like, and they'll need to understand the thought process or reasoning process that exists inside of these foundational models. So like when, if I'm GitHub and Claude says like, oh, I'm going to go look at this code, and then I'm going to look for a PR, and then I'm going to do this other stuff. Like, I need to provide access and opportunity inside of each, step so that Claude knows where to go next. Similar to like how I would have a UI for a user, and it's like, well, when I have a PR, there's 2 things I want the user to be able to do. I want them to like merge on it or comment on it, right? Like that understanding of how an agent reasons, and then designing to that as a primary user is like, yeah, it is a huge part of the future. Yeah. And we're getting calls for that, and we're getting calls for that fairly often. I want to build agents inside of my enterprise, but I also need to expose all of my existing systems to the agents that I do want to build.
So that's an interesting point that you brought up. It's about, so if you think of APIs and if you think of user interfaces, they are sort of implicit, right? I mean, they're given as it is, and for the APIs, you expect someone to interact with it. You expect someone to hit it. For UIs, you expect the user to interact with it.
Yeah.
With an agent, what's interesting that you're talking about is that same tool or whatever you want to call that, the interaction thing that the AI has to work with, has to be explicit. Like whether it's instructions, you're exposing how the agent interacts with that system, right? So it all comes back to, again, what is a journey that a user takes from point A to point B? What is a journey that a developer takes from point A to point B? But for an agent, that journey has to be made explicit, right? Like this is the existing
not
process.
necessarily so explicit that it's like, process step A, step B, step C. It's the same as like when I design a UI. I want to have in my UI, ways to show a human that there's like things they can do. These elements are interactive. I make a accept button green and a cancel button red because that kind of communicates that to the human.
The affordance.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like we need, there are patterns, but those things, a LLM might not be able to see the green and the red,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or they don't connect the CSS, if they're looking at just like markup, they don't connect the green CSS with the word. And so we need to understand how an LLM sees the world. and then design our system so it can interact with them in appropriate ways. And that is a really cool challenge for teams because they have a new user.
Yeah, but again, it goes back to, so what I meant was not making the process explicit, but the reasoning explicit.
Yeah. So like, exactly. So like where and how things, and like, a web page with a bunch of stuff on it could confuse an LLM, but it could be really nice for a user because of the way we've architected the information on that. But that architecture is, it's confusing to a language model. And so instead, I would architect that, that information architecture, or the hierarchy of information in a way that is understandable to an LLM, but maybe actually really confusing to a user.
I don't know if it's this is sort of related, but it reminds me of like ARIA labels for accessibility.
Sure.
Like, it's almost providing that additional context for an agent, for an LLM, saying that, okay, this page looks, beautiful, like really well designed for an end user, but also in the back end, it's good for accessibility. It's also well structured for developers. But then you have, like you said, that third user, that's the agent, that also understands not just how it's composed, but what is the intent behind it, so they can take actions on it.
The teams that own the domains that build like services need to own the experience. So they're owning the developer experience around how their API is structured. And that can be like responsiveness, data architecture, the RESTful paths or the GraphQL APIs and how resources interact. Or it could be they're owning the UI, if there is a UI for this system. And they understand how a user moves through their different screens and all that kind of stuff. Now they have to build that same thing again, but they have a new user, and that user is an agent. And I do think the companies that build these things for agents, if you're a B2C company or B2B, but you have like publicly facing interfaces, building these things for agents will get you ahead, because then these agents will be able to crawl, understand, and work with you, and they'll recommend you more. And if I'm building stuff for internal tools, it allows for teams to more quickly integrate. It also prevents sprawl, so security teams and everything can feel more comfortable with those integrations.
So it reminds me when mobile first came out, right? Because smartphones came out, all the websites had to be designed for mobile, and you actually got dinged by Google if your website wasn't mobile first.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Now we're thinking of agent first. Like, can you design experiences and interfaces, or whatever else, with an agent first mindset that makes it easier for LLMs to interact with?
That's a LinkedIn post right there. If you don't know, Shahed posts every day on LinkedIn, and they're really good. Like and subscribe. These combos keep going long after the mics are off, especially on LinkedIn. If you liked what you heard, connect with us there. Search for our names or /deploy. Drop a note, and let's keep building.
You guys know me pretty well, but I don't think you understand how obsessed I am with trains. Like, I love trains. I just went to Japan recently, and I took the Shinkansen, which is the bullet train, and I was just blown away. It's like you're riding on this thing like 250 miles an hour across Japan. It's wild. But I found this post online that I thought was interesting around two of my favorite things, trains and enterprise integrations. Did you know that?
Oh my God!
Yeah. Did you know that the UK's and many train systems still use? Hear me out. This is really interesting.
Okay.
Airline reservation systems that were built in the 60s still exist. Train operators, like the San Francisco train system, runs on 5-inch floppy disks. And they have to pay somebody to like flip the disk over to keep things running. So how intractable is that? Like, we're over here talking about agents as this new user and all these things. And the city of San Francisco is looking at us like, we're still using 5.25 floppy inch disks for this. How intractable is that, dude?
I cannot wait for the large consulting companies to go grift all the Fortune 500s on another modernization. Like, they will make millions. No, we modernize software so that we can handle like the new requirements of the world every time like new interfaces or things come up. So we had to modernize software in order to get to mobile. We had to modernize software to get to real time. there is software that doesn't need to be modernized because that new interface isn't a requirement, and we should just leave it alone. Like, and when agents need to interact with, these 5-inch floppy disk train systems, we should take a conscious look at how to modernize those systems incrementally and productively without like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which is exactly what we did when we went cloud native, which is exactly what we did when we went, mobile first. It was like modernize everything, put it, break apart the monolith and put it into the cloud. And it's just like, then you have a monolith that is service oriented in the cloud. Like, it doesn't give you anything. So I would drive towards like, what is the experience and how can these things interact and how can I build interfaces for them so that we can avoid this like massive modernization grift.
I think the only place I'm going to push back on you though is like San Francisco is going to have to continue to buy those floppy disks in perpetuity. And so
why? Because they like demagnetize?
Yes, because they wear out.
All right.
And so like the problem is resources. And there will be a certain point in time where they might not actually be able to acquire the resources necessary to do that. So we can't just leave it alone. But your point's well taken.
There's a bunch of reasons to modernize. And like there's financial reasons, there's technical reasons, there's experiential reasons. But often what happens when we want to modernize, so it's like, oh, we want to have an agent be able to do this, or we want to get, this service into the cloud so it can auto scale better than on-prem. The goal is to have a real reason to modernize, and you modernize exactly what should be modernized versus like, oh, if we're gonna modernize our car rental reservation system because we want it to be more real time in terms of inventory, we also have to modernize the inventory management and we have to modernize this other thing. And all of a sudden you have an entire, mainframe system that needs to be lifted and shifted into the cloud, broken apart, all this internal logic that's evolved over years. And that project was dead before it started.
Yeah. I don't disagree. I think people are very cavalier to go chase new shiny tech. I think, I don't know that in this kind of particular vertical that there's going to be a lot of people pushing for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting place to be where there could be a resource contention for these things, but to your point, Austin, they've been running just fine already.
Yeah, if there's a resource contention, like I need to run this thing on an old, AS400 and I can't find another one because this one got struck by lightning.
Right.
Then maybe we need to modernize, right? Like there's reasons to do this, but we should take those. I don't mind a train system that works and runs on these things.
So unless your hand is forced, don't modernize it.
Yeah, and then scope that effort. Like we were working with a car rental company in the reservation system, and they had gone through a failed modernization that landed in a lawsuit with a different consulting organization, a large one. And they had us come in and work specifically on a really like discrete problem. How do I get the telematics data out of the car to understand how much gas is left versus have a human being look at the gas gauge? Because humans, can be wrong. They look at it from an angle or something like that. So like we want just telematics data, and then we need to push that into our old mainframe system. And we built interfaces and APIs and software. This is not AI, but we built interfaces, APIs, and software that could do that. And we didn't have to modernize their entire, stack. And this other consulting company, that was their objective. And that's why I say there's a consulting grift of like, if I can convince you to modernize everything, because like if this goes new, then that has to be new, and then this has to be new too, and then this, then all of a sudden I have a $20 million 5-year effort that never ends that I can just like pile people into.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's.
And there's an opportunity for all these like big SIs to go and pitch that exact same thing for these new agent users, the same way cloud migration, was that before. And I would just be cautious of that. Like you can build integrations that an agent can work with, and for this new agent user, without having to throw entire systems out. They can integrate. It can work with your systems, and it should be able to. And then be really, really disciplined about how much you have to change.
But Shahed, I want to get one thing from you, because like from a design perspective, what I think is if you have a train system that's been running for the last 60 years on the same tech, isn't that a good testament to how well designed it is?
It is, but you also have to look at it from, what else is out there? Like, are we talking about the end user experience, or are we talking about the operator experience, right? It's what is
I think the discs are pretty invisible to the end user, which probably is a good thing, and they'd be freaking out.
but the user experience depends on that back. They won't see it. Like it's like a back end or a backstage function, right? But the user experience is still dependent on that backstage function. So if any of the backstage functions fail or are not optimal, then it affects obviously the end user experience. So I would look at that, but it is a testament to the fact that it's lasted this long. If it ain't broke, why fix it?
Our office in Chicago is in the old post office.
Yeah.
And that building was built, forever ago. It used to be the largest post office in America. It pushed a whole bunch of packages for Montgomery Ward and Sears through it. And now it's headquarters for Uber, it's headquarters for us, it's headquarters or Uber or Freight, Walgreens is there. And like they structurally were able to repurpose significant parts of the building to be for tech companies, but the bones of the building are still there. And I think that like they didn't have to rebuild that entire beautiful building. Instead, they were able to use it for new purposes and upgrade it, incrementally. And that is the same about software. Like we have these legacy systems and we have that are structurally sound, and we can only repurpose and rebuild parts of them versus getting lost in the fact that we need it to tear down all the walls and all the ductwork and all of everything in order to make this building, this building work or this software work.
Next week, we're getting practical. AI is great at some things, but where does it actually save time? We'll break down what it can do, what it can't, and how smart teams are getting the most out of it. Remember to respect the craft. Evolution doesn't require chaos, and teams will always beat heroes.